Welcome back to Tina Romance Library, where powerful alphas fall hard, and the women they underestimate change everything. Every story here is complete, immersive, and emotion-driven. No cliffhangers, no rushed endings, just full romances you can sink into. So, if you love possessive alphas, strong heroines who don't beg, slow burn tension, emotional payoffs, and stories that actually finishes, you're in the right place. I need you to join the pack right now by subscribing, leave a like if you enjoy immersive romance, and settle in because once the story begins, we don't stop until the ending. Now, let's get into it. I needed a husband by tomorrow. Not because I was in love, not because I'd found my soulmate or felt some divine pull toward forever. No, I needed a husband because I was being sold, like livestock, like property, like something that could be bartered, packaged, and handed over to the highest bidder without a second thought. And the clock was ticking. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to the end of my life as I knew it. My father had made the deal weeks ago, shaking hands with a man whose eyes were cold and empty, whose smile never reached past his teeth. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't asked. I was simply informed, as if my entire existence could be summed up in a contract signed over whiskey and lies. I had 24 hours left. 24 hours before I'd be dragged down an aisle I never wanted to walk, toward a man I'd never chosen, into a life that would swallow me whole. And the worst part? The cruelest, most gut-wrenching part? The man I trusted most in this world, the one person I thought would protect me, stand by me, fight for me, was already planning how to destroy me. He wore concern like a mask, spoke comfort like a script. But I'd seen the glint in his eye when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd heard the whispers behind closed doors. He wasn't trying to save me. He was orchestrating my downfall, piece by calculated piece. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Not far, just far enough. Into the shadows of the city, where the streetlights flickered and the air tasted like rain and desperation. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. My hands shook as I clutched the small pouch of gold I'd stolen from my father's study. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. And then I saw him. A stranger, leaning against the brick wall of an alley, half hidden in darkness. Tall, broad-shouldered, dangerous in a way that made my pulse skip and my instincts scream at me to turn around. But I didn't. I couldn't, because desperation makes you brave in the worst possible ways. I walked up to him, my voice barely steady, and made an offer I never thought I'd make. "I'll pay you," I said, holding out the gold with trembling fingers. "Marry me, just for one night, just long enough to stop this." He didn't laugh, didn't mock me. He just looked at me, really looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through my skin, past my fear, into the raw, aching truth of what I was running from. And then he said yes. I didn't know his name, didn't know where he came from or why a man like him would agree to something so insane. I didn't know that the stranger I'd just propositioned in the dark, the man I'd offered gold to in exchange for a fake marriage, wasn't just anyone. He was the Alpha King, and I'd just made a deal with the most powerful and most dangerous man in the entire realm. I wasn't born into love. I was born into strategy. My father made that clear from the moment I was old enough to understand words. "You are an investment, Sarah," he'd say, his voice flat, clinical, like he was discussing grain futures or trade routes. And investments must yield returns. So I was raised accordingly, trained like a show horse, polished like a piece of silverware meant to impress guests at dinner parties I wasn't important enough to speak at. I learned to curtsy at precisely the right angle, to smile without showing too much teeth, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny and agree with opinions I found repulsive. I learned to be seen and not heard, beautiful and not complicated, present and not real. I was taught that my value was in my bloodline, my face, my ability to produce heirs for whichever family my father decided was worth aligning with. My thoughts, my dreams, the things that made me me, those were liabilities, inconveniences, things to be trained out of me like bad habits. And I tried. God, I tried. Because what choice did I have? I swallowed my bitterness, buried my rage beneath layers of silk and politeness, played the part so well that sometimes I almost forgot I was acting. Almost forgot that somewhere beneath all that grooming and conditioning, there was a girl who wanted to scream. But then my father announced my engagement. Lord Bartholomew. Even his name tasted wrong in my mouth. Heavy, sour, like something rotting. He was old. Not distinguished old or silver fox old. Just old. Old enough to be my grandfather. Old enough that his hands shook when he reached for his wine glass. And when he reached for me, the first time we met, he touched my hair without asking. Ran his fingers down the length of it like I was a bolt of fabric he was considering purchasing. His breath smelled like tobacco and decay, and when he smiled, I saw more gaps than teeth. Beautiful, he murmured, his voice wet and rattling. You'll do nicely. I wanted to vomit, but I smiled, because that's what I'd been trained to do. Thank you, my lord, I said, my voice sweet as poison. My father stood beside me, beaming like he'd just closed the deal of a lifetime. And maybe he had. Bartholomew was rich obscenely so. His coffers overflowed with gold earned from mining operations that worked men to death and lands seized from families too weak to fight back. He wanted a young wife to hang on his arm, to bear him sons before his body gave out entirely, to prove to the world that he still had the vitality of a younger man. And my father wanted his money. Apparently my opinion wasn't listed as a requirement. I wasn't being married. I was being transferred, from one man's property to another's, a transaction, a merger, nothing more. The wedding was set for the autumn equinox just 3 months away. 3 months to prepare myself for a life spent in that man's bed, at that man's table, under that man's control. 3 months to accept that my body would no longer be my own, that my future had already been decided by men who saw me as a means to an end. I tried to tell myself it could be worse, that other women had survived worse, that I was lucky, even lucky to be valuable enough to marry well, lucky to have a father powerful enough to arrange such a match. But late at night, alone in my room, I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in and the air was too thick to breathe, and every day that passed brought me closer to a cage I'd never escape from. I started having nightmares, dreaming that I was already married, already trapped, already gone, that the girl I used to be had vanished completely, replaced by some hollow, obedient ghost who answered to Lady Bartholomew and forgot she'd ever wanted anything different. And then, 1 week before the wedding, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. My father. And Councilman Greaves, the man I'd trusted since childhood, the man who'd taught me to ride horses and smuggled me books my father wouldn't approve of, the man I thought actually cared about me. They were in my father's study. The door was cracked just enough. She'll be compliant, my father said. I've made sure of it. And if she resists? Greaves asked. My father laughed. Cold, sharp. Then Bartholomew will break her in. He's certainly paid enough for the privilege. Silence. Then Greaves. Shame, really. She had potential. Potential doesn't pay debts, my father replied. I stopped breathing. Greaves wasn't trying to help me. He never had been. He was just another player in the same sick game, watching from the sidelines while I was sold off piece by piece. That's when I realized no one was coming to save me. If I wanted out, I'd have to save myself. His name was Thomas. And for a little while, he made me believe in something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. We met by accident, or at least, that's what I told myself at the time. He was a guard in my father's household, not high-ranking, not particularly notable, just there, steady, quiet, with kind eyes and a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The first time he spoke to me, really spoke to me, not just the polite nods and, yes, my lady, that came with his position. I was in the gardens, crying behind the rose bushes where no one could see. It was 2 weeks after the engagement announcement, 2 weeks of feeling like I was drowning in a life I hadn't chosen. Are you all right? He'd asked, his voice low and careful. I should have lied, should have straightened my spine and smoothed my face, and told him everything was perfectly fine. Thank you very much, but I didn't. Maybe I was tired of pretending. Maybe I just needed anyone to see that I wasn't okay. No, I whispered, I'm not. And instead of walking away, instead of reporting my tears to my father or pretending he hadn't heard, Thomas sat down beside me. Not too close. Respectful. but close enough that I didn't feel quite so alone. "I'm sorry," he said simply. 2 words. That's all it took. I broke. I told him everything. About Bartholomew. About my father. About feeling like a bird with clipped wings, trapped in a gilded cage that was only getting smaller. And Thomas listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't tell me I was being dramatic or ungrateful. He just listened. And when I was done, when I'd emptied myself of all that poison I'd been carrying, he looked at me with those kind, steady eyes and said, "You deserve better than this." I wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. After that, we started meeting in secret, late at night, when the household was asleep, in hidden corners of the estate where the other guards didn't patrol. He'd bring me wildflowers he'd picked on his rounds. I'd bring him pastries stolen from the kitchen. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing about the lives we wished we could live, the places we wished we could go. And somewhere along the way, talking turned into touching, hands brushing, fingers intertwining, his lips against mine in the darkness, urgent and desperate and real. "I love you," he whispered one night, his forehead pressed against mine, his hands cradling my face like I was something precious. "I love you, and I won't let them take you." My heart cracked wide open. "Then help me," I begged. "Help me get away from here, please." He kissed me again, deeper this time, and when he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with determination. "I will," he promised. "We'll leave together, you and me. We'll go somewhere they'll never find us." So we made a plan. It wasn't elaborate. We didn't have time for elaborate. The wedding was 6 days away. 6 days before I'd be bound to Bartholomew forever, before any chance of escape would be sealed shut. Thomas knew the guard rotations better than anyone. He knew which routes were watched and which weren't. He knew about the old servants' tunnels that ran beneath the estate passages that hadn't been used in years, that most people had forgotten even existed. "There's an exit near the eastern wall," he told me, sketching a rough map on a scrap of parchment. "It comes out in the woods, about a mile from the main road. I'll have horses waiting. We leave at midnight, 3 days from now." 3 days. 72 hours. I could survive that. I had to survive that. I started preparing immediately. I bribed Elara, one of the younger maids who'd always been kind to me, slipped her a gold bracelet in exchange for her silence and her help packing a bag I could carry without raising suspicion. Just the essentials. A change of clothes, sturdy boots, a cloak, and gold. Every piece of jewelry I owned, every coin I'd ever been given, every valuable thing I could fit into the hidden pockets of that bag. It was everything I had in the world. Everything I'd managed to keep for myself in a life where I owned almost nothing. Everything I owned, and everything I hoped. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining what freedom would feel like. Thomas and I, riding through the countryside with nothing but the stars above us and the future stretching out ahead. Maybe we'd go to the coast. Maybe we'd find a small village where no one knew our names. Maybe we'd build a life that was ours, messy and imperfect and real. Maybe I'd finally get to be more than just a pawn in someone else's game. The night before we were supposed to leave, Thomas came to my window. I let him in, my heart racing, my hands shaking with anticipation and fear and wild, reckless hope. "Tomorrow," he said, pulling me into his arms. "Tomorrow we'll be free." I kissed him like it was the last time. Like if I held on tight enough, nothing could tear us apart. "I love you," I whispered against his mouth. "I love you too," he said. And I believed him. God help me. I believed every single word. Midnight came. I was ready. Dressed in the plain traveling clothes Elara had smuggled to me, my bag packed and hidden beneath my bed, my heart hammering so hard I thought the entire estate could hear it. Every second felt like an eternity. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder. But I was ready. Ready to run. Ready to fight for the life I wanted. Ready to trust that Thomas would be waiting for me, just like he promised. I slipped out of my room, moving through the darkened hallways like a ghost, down the servants' stairs, through the kitchens. To the entrance of the old tunnel Thomas had told me about, the one that would lead me to freedom. Except when I got there, the door was locked. Not just closed, locked, from the outside. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't right. Thomas said it would be open. He promised it would be open. Maybe he was running late. Maybe there'd been a complication with the guard rotation. Maybe. No. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, in the sick, twisting sensation spreading through my gut. I needed to find him. I changed course, moving quickly through the estate's back passages until I reached the eastern gate. If Thomas couldn't get the tunnel open, maybe he'd be waiting there instead. Maybe he'd have another plan. But he wasn't at the gate. So I kept going, past the walls, into the village that bordered my father's lands, desperation driving me forward even as logic screamed at me to turn back. And that's when I saw the tavern. A squat, weathered building with warm light spilling from its windows and the sound of rough laughter echoing into the night. I almost walked past it, almost kept searching. But then I heard his voice. Thomas. My Thomas. Laughing. I stopped dead in my tracks, my blood turning to ice. I moved to the window, pressing myself against the wall, peering through the grimy glass into the crowded room beyond. And there he was, sitting at a corner table with 3 other men I didn't recognize. A half-empty tankard in front of him, his face flushed with drink and amusement. He looked happy, relaxed, like he didn't have a care in the world, like he wasn't supposed to be helping me escape right now. Can't believe she actually fell for it, one of the men said, slapping the table as he laughed. Thomas grinned, wide and easy and so familiar it made my chest ache. Told you she would, he said, taking a long drink. Rich girls like that, they're so desperate to feel special. They'll believe anything you tell them. The world tilted. So what's the play? Another man asked. You really gonna rob her? Already did, Thomas replied, pulling something from his pocket. My grandmother's ring. The one I'd given him last week. The one he said he'd keep safe. The one he promised meant something. He tossed it onto the table like it was trash. Solid gold, he said. Should fetch a decent price. And she's got more where that came from. Jewelry, coins, the whole lot packed up and ready to go. She was planning to bring it all with her tonight. Tonight? The third man leaned forward, eyes gleaming. She was running tonight? Supposed to, Thomas shrugged. But I locked the tunnel. She's probably still wandering around the estate looking for me right now. Stupid little dove. They laughed. All of them. Deep belly laughs that rang in my ears like knives scraping bone. You're wicked, one of them said, but it sounded like a compliment. I'm practical, Thomas corrected. Why run away with her when I can take everything she's got and stay right here? No risk, all reward. What if she figures it out? He waved a dismissive hand. She won't. And even if she does, what's she gonna do? Run crying to Daddy? He'll just marry her off anyway. She's got no options. No power. No way out. She's trapped. He smiled. And she's too in love with me to realize it. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't do anything except stand there, frozen, as the man I'd trusted, the man I'd loved described exactly how he'd played me, used me, destroyed me. For gold. For gold. Not even because he hated me or wanted to hurt me, just because I was an easy mark, a convenient target, a foolish, desperate girl who'd handed him everything and asked for nothing but his love in return. And he'd laughed at me. My legs gave out. I stumbled back from the window, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Bile rose in my throat. My vision blurred. Everything inside me was breaking, shattering, crumbling into pieces so small I'd never be able to put them back together. I wasn't heartbroken. I was annihilated. Every moment we'd shared, every kiss, every whispered promise, every touch that made me feel seen and wanted and real, it was all a lie, a performance. A con designed to extract as much value from me as possible before discarding me like garbage. He never loved me. He never even liked me. I was just prey. I don't know how long I stood there in that alley, shaking and nauseous, and so filled with rage and humiliation I thought my skin might split open from the pressure of it. But eventually, the numbness faded, and beneath it was something else. Something sharp, something cold, something that burned hotter than any heartbreak. Fury. Pure, molten, clarifying fury. Thomas thought I was trapped, thought I had no options, no power, no way out. He was wrong. I'd find a way out. Even if I had to burn the whole world down to do it. I ran. Not toward anything, just away. Away from that tavern, away from Thomas's laughter, away from the shattered remains of the girl who'd been stupid enough to believe in love. My feet pounded against the cobblestones, my breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at my throat. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and the nightmare unfolding behind me. The streets were dark and empty, the village long since gone to sleep. Fog had rolled in from the river, thick and gray, turning the world into something ghostly and unfamiliar. I stumbled through it blindly, tears streaming down my face, my mind a chaos of fractured thoughts and screaming panic. What was I going to do? The wedding was tomorrow, and my only escape plan had just revealed itself to be an elaborate trap designed to rob me blind. I had nothing, no one, nowhere to go. The thought hit me like a physical blow, and I staggered, my vision swimming. My hand shot out to steady myself against a wall. Except it wasn't a wall. It was solid, warm, alive. I crashed into him hard enough that I should have bounced off, should have fallen backward onto the street. But I didn't, because his hands caught me strong, sure, impossibly fast, and held me upright with a control that felt almost casual. "Careful," he said. His voice was low, calm, the kind of voice that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. I jerked back, my heart leaping into my throat, trying to pull away from his grip. But he didn't let go. Not restraining me, exactly. Just steadying me. Like he knew that if he released me, I'd collapse. "I'm sorry," I gasped, the words automatic. "I didn't see I wasn't." "Breathe." One word, quiet, certain. And somehow, impossibly, I did. The panic receded just enough for me to actually look at him. He was tall, taller than Thomas, taller than any of my father's guards, broad-shouldered beneath a dark cloak that seemed to absorb the fog around us. His face was shadowed, angular, all sharp edges and controlled power. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Gold. Not brown or hazel or green-flecked amber. Gold. Like molten metal, like firelight, like something that shouldn't exist in a human face. They pinned me in place more effectively than his hands ever could. "You're running," he observed. Not a question. A fact. I opened my mouth to deny it, to lie, to do what I'd been trained to do my entire life and smooth over the truth with something more palatable. But I was so tired of lying. "Yes," I whispered. His head tilted slightly, those impossible eyes studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "From what?" "Everything, everyone, my whole goddamn life." "A marriage," I said instead. "Tomorrow. I can't. I won't. So don't." I almost laughed. It bubbled up in my chest, bitter and half hysterical. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he agreed. Silence stretched between us, heavy with fog and unspoken things. He still hadn't let go of me, and I still hadn't pulled away. In hindsight, proposing to a stranger in an alley is not ideal courtship etiquette, but desperation makes you reckless, makes you bold, makes you do things that would have horrified you just hours before. And I was nothing if not desperate. I reached into my bag with shaking hands and pulled out the small pouch I'd packed, the one containing every piece of gold and jewelry I hadn't already given to Thomas. Everything I had left in the world. I held it out to him. "I'll pay you," I said. My voice was steadier now. Harder. "Whatever's in here, it's yours. All of it. I just need you to do one thing." Those golden eyes dropped to the pouch, then back to my face. "And what would that be?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between us, absurd and impossible, and completely sincere. He didn't laugh, didn't mock me, just waited, utterly still, for me to continue. So I did. "It doesn't have to be real," I explained, the words tumbling out faster now. "Just legal, binding. Enough that when my father comes looking for me tomorrow, I can say I'm already married, that I'm someone else's wife, that I'm not available anymore." I swallowed hard, hating how small my voice sounded, how desperate. "After that you can leave, disappear. I'll never bother you again, but I need this. Tonight, now. I need a husband before dawn, and my voice cracked. "I have nowhere else to go." I wasn't begging, I was bargaining for my life, offering everything I had in exchange for the one thing that might save me. It was insane, reckless, the kind of plan that could end with me robbed and abandoned in this alley, or worse. But I'd already been betrayed by someone I loved. What could a stranger possibly do that would hurt more than that? The man studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Then, slowly, he reached out and closed my fingers around the pouch, pushing the gold back toward me. "Keep your money," he said quietly. My heart plummeted. Of course he'd say no. Why would anyone agree to something so? "I'll do it." I blinked. "What?" "I'll marry you," he said, his voice steady and sure, like he was discussing the weather instead of binding himself to a complete stranger. But not for gold. Hope and confusion warred in my chest. Then, why? He looked at me for a long moment, those golden eyes seeing something I couldn't name. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "Because you asked." Simple, impossible, true. "I don't even know your name," I whispered. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or regret. "Kai," he said. Just that. Nothing else. No title, no family name, no explanation. "Sira," I replied. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it. Then he released me, stepping back to give me space I suddenly wasn't sure I wanted. "There's a temple 2 streets over," he said. "The priestess owes me a favor. She'll perform the ceremony tonight. No questions asked." This was happening. This was actually happening. "Okay," I breathed. "Okay," he echoed. And then he held out his hand. I stared at it for a heartbeat. This stranger's hand. This man I didn't know, offering to save me for reasons I didn't understand. I took it. His fingers closed around mine, warm, strong, anchor steady. And together, we walked into the fog. The temple was older than the village itself. Stone walls worn smooth by centuries of weather, covered in creeping vines that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. The door stood open, as if expecting us. Inside, candles flickered in the darkness, casting dancing shadows across ancient carvings I couldn't quite make out. The priestess was waiting. She was small, gray-haired, with eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. When she saw Kai, she bowed her head not in greeting, but in deference. Something cold slithered down my spine. Who was this man? But there was no time for questions. The priestess gestured us forward, and we stood before her altar as she began to speak the old words. Words I'd heard at other weddings, familiar and formal, and utterly surreal when applied to me. I barely heard them. My mind was spinning, my heart racing, my entire body vibrating with the enormity of what I was doing. I was marrying a stranger, a man whose last name I didn't know, whose life I knew nothing about, whose golden eyes held secrets I couldn't begin to guess at. But when the priestess asked if I took him as my husband, I didn't hesitate. "I do." My voice rang clear in the silence. Kai's turn. His response was quieter, but no less certain. "I do." The priestess smiled a strange, knowing expression, and bound our hands together with a length of silver cord. "By the old laws and the new, I pronounce you bound," she said. And just like that, it was done. I was married. The priestess retreated into the shadows, leaving us alone in the candlelit space. Kai unwound the cord from our hands slowly, carefully, his fingers brushing against mine. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. The way he said it made my stomach drop. "What?" He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was measured, cautious, like he was explaining something fragile. "The ceremony we just performed, it's binding under human law, legal, exactly what you needed. But," I could hear the but coming, "but there's another law, an older one that supersedes human contracts entirely." My throat went dry. "What kind of law?" His golden eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd crashed into him, I saw something that might have been uncertainty. "The law of my people," he said. "Shifters." The world tilted. Shifters. Werewolves. The stories I'd heard as a child, dismissed as fairy tales and superstition. Creatures of moon and magic and wild. Untamed power. Real. He was real. I couldn't finish the sentence. Yes, simple, unflinching. I should have been terrified. Should have run screaming from that temple and never looked back. But I didn't move. Because somehow, in a way I didn't fully understand, it made sense. The gold eyes, the controlled strength, the way the priestess had deferred to him, the power that radiated from him like heat from a flame. What does that mean? I whispered. For this? He gestured between us, and I realized he was still holding my hand. Among my kind, marriage isn't just legal, he explained. It's a claiming, a bond. When two shifters marry, they're bound together emotionally, spiritually, permanently. There's no divorce, no annulment, no separation. The bond is absolute. Ice flooded my veins. You're saying if I claim you as my mate, you'll be bound to me forever, he said quietly. You'll feel what I feel, share my strength, carry my protection, but you'll also be mine, in a way that can never be undone. Another cage, another prison, just a different shape. I tried to pull my hand away, but he held on not tightly, just present. I'm not your father, he said, and there was something fierce in his voice now. I'm not Thomas. I'm not any of the men who've tried to own you. The claiming bond isn't about control. It's about connection, partnership, protection. But you'd still have power over me, I said, my voice shaking. No. His grip tightened just slightly. We'd have power over each other. The bond goes both ways, Sarah. What you feel, I feel. If you're hurt, I'm hurt. If you suffer, I suffer. You wouldn't be mine to command. You'd be mine to cherish. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. Why are you telling me this? I asked. You could have just not mentioned it. Let me stay ignorant. Because you deserve the truth, he said simply. You deserve to choose. Really choose. Not have the choice stolen from you the way everyone else in your life has stolen it. Tears burned behind my eyes. So I'm asking, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost tender. Do you want the bond? Do you want to be claimed? Or do you want this to remain what we agreed on, a legal formality, nothing more? He was giving me a choice. A real, genuine choice. I looked up at him, this stranger who'd agreed to save me, who'd married me without asking for payment, who was now offering me power instead of demanding my submission. If I say no? I had to know. Then we're married in name only, he said. The bond won't form. You'll be protected by the legal contract, but nothing more. And when this is over, when you're safe, we can walk away from each other. No ties, no obligations. Freedom. He was offering me freedom. But freedom felt cold and hollow in a way I hadn't expected. I'd spent my whole life desperate for freedom, for the right to choose my own path, make my own decisions, belong to no one but myself. But standing here in this ancient temple, my hand in his, I realized something that terrified me. I didn't want to walk away. I want the bond, I whispered. His eyes widened slightly. You're sure? No, I admitted, but I'm choosing it anyway. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing something that's mine. Someone who sees me as more than just a bargaining chip. So yes, I'm sure. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then, slowly, he raised our joined hands and pressed them against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat strong and steady beneath my palm. This will hurt, he warned. Just for a moment. I can handle pain, I said. His lips quirked into something that might have been a smile. I believe you. He released my hand and stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. His fingers found my chin, tilting my face up toward his. My pulse thundered in my ears. Tell me again, he said softly, so I know you're certain. I choose this, I said. I choose you. I choose the bond. Then I claim you, Sarah, he murmured, as my mate. My equal, my other half. And he bit me. Not violently, not roughly, but there was nothing gentle about it either. His teeth sank into the curve where my neck met my shoulder, and the world exploded. Pain sharp and bright and burning. But beneath the pain was something else. Something vast and overwhelming and impossibly alive. Magic. It rushed through me like wildfire, like lightning, like every emotion I'd ever felt concentrated into a single overwhelming surge. I could feel him not just physically, but deeper. His strength, his determination, his fierce, protective devotion. And underneath it all, a tenderness that made my chest ache. He pulled back, and I saw my blood on his lips. But it didn't disgust me. It felt sacred, ancient, right. "Sira," he breathed, and his voice was rough with emotion. I could feel him, feel the bond settling into place like a lock clicking home, feel his steady calm wrapping around my panic, feel his protection settling over me like armor I'd never have to take off. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen. Not purchased, not bartered, not assigned. Chosen. "I feel you," I whispered, awed. "I know," he said, his hand coming up to cup my face. "I feel you too." And in that moment, standing in that ancient temple with this stranger turned husband turned mate, I finally understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't about belonging to no one. It was about choosing who you belonged with. The bond hummed beneath my skin as we left the temple. I could feel Kai beside me, not just physically, but in some deeper, more fundamental way. His presence was a steady pulse in the back of my mind, warm and constant, like a heartbeat that wasn't quite my own. "We should get you somewhere safe," he said as we stepped back into the fog-shrouded streets. I almost laughed. "Safe? There's nowhere safe. My father will come looking for me the moment he realizes I'm gone. And when he finds me, he won't hurt you." The certainty in his voice made me pause. "You don't know my father." "I don't need to." His golden eyes found mine in the darkness. "You're mine now, Sarah, under my protection. Anyone who touches you answers to me." The words should have felt possessive, controlling, but they didn't. They felt like a promise, like a shield I'd never had before. "We should still go," I said quietly. "Get out of the city before dawn, before they start searching." Kai was silent for a moment, and I felt something complicated ripple through the bond. Reluctance, resignation, something that tasted like duty. "There's somewhere I need to take you first," he said finally. "Where?" "You'll see." He wouldn't say more than that. We walked through the sleeping village, his hand still wrapped around mine, until we reached the edge of my father's estate. My stomach twisted. "Kai, we can't." "Trust me," he said quietly. I didn't. Not entirely. But the bond hummed with his calm certainty, and I found myself following him anyway, through the servants' entrance, up the back stairs, into the very heart of the place I'd been trying to escape. And then I heard voices. My father's study. The door was closed, but I could hear them inside, raised voices, angry tones, the sounds of a confrontation already in progress. Completely unacceptable. My father's voice, sharp with fury. "The contract was signed, the agreement made. The girl has run off," Bartholomew's wheeze. "Ungrateful little. She'll be found." Thomas's voice, smooth and confident. "I know where she keeps her valuables. We'll have her back before dawn." Ice flooded my veins. He was helping them search for me. Of course he was. Kai's hand tightened on mine, and through the bond I felt a flash of something dark and dangerous. Rage, carefully controlled. "You don't have to face them," he murmured. But I did. I knew I did. Because running would only delay the inevitable. They'd hunt me forever, drag me back, force me into Bartholomew's bed and Thomas's scheme and my father's plans. Unless I ended it now. "I have to," I whispered. Kai studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded and released my hand, and kicked the door open. The room went silent. My father stood behind his desk, his face purple with rage. Bartholomew sat in a chair by the fire, looking smug and predatory. Thomas leaned against the wall, arms crossed, that familiar easy smile on his face. They all turned to stare at me. "Sarah." My father's voice was deadly quiet. "Where have you been?" I lifted my chin. "That's no longer your concern." His eyes narrowed. Then he moved faster than I expected around the desk and across the room. The slap cracked across my face like a whip. Pain exploded through my cheek, sharp and hot. I staggered, my vision blurring, tasting blood where my teeth had cut into my lip. "You will speak to me with respect," my father hissed. "You are my daughter. my property, and you will—" He never finished the sentence, because Kai stepped between us. One moment my father was looming over me, his hand raised for another strike. The next, Kai was there, appearing so quickly it was like he'd simply materialized, and my father was stumbling backward, his face gone white with shock. "Touch her again," Kai said softly, "and you'll lose the hand." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father recovered quickly, drawing himself up to his full height. "Who the hell are you? Remove yourself from my home before I have you." The door burst open again. Guards poured in, not my father's guards, but others. Men in black armor bearing a sigil I didn't recognize, a silver wolf against a dark moon. They knelt, all of them, in perfect unison, heads bowed, fists pressed to their chests. And then the rest of the household appeared in the doorway. Servants, advisors, even Councilman Greaves, his face gone gray with terror. One by one, they dropped to their knees. My father looked around wildly, confusion and the first edge of fear creeping into his expression. "What is the meaning of—" "Kneel." Kai's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the air itself seem to tremble. Command, authority, power. My father's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of his desk, fighting against the compulsion, his whole body shaking with the effort. Bartholomew had already collapsed to the floor, wheezing and terrified. Thomas pressed himself against the wall, his face drained of all color, all arrogance gone. And I finally understood. "You're not just a shifter," I breathed. Kai turned to look at me, and in his golden eyes I saw the truth he'd been keeping from me. The truth I'd been too desperate to notice. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." He looked back at my father, at the room full of kneeling, trembling people, and when he spoke again, his voice rang with undeniable authority. "I am Kai Arcturus, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Sovereign of the Wolf Packs, High Lord of the Shifting Courts. The stranger I'd tried to buy in an alley. The man I'd proposed to in desperation. The husband I'd bound myself to just hours ago. Was the most powerful king alive. And this woman," Kai continued, his hand finding mine again, pulling me close against his side, "is my mate. My queen. Bound to me by blood and magic and choice." His eyes fixed on my father, who'd finally given up the fight and dropped to his knees. "Which means your claim on her is void. Your contract with Lord Bartholomew is nullified. Your authority over her is ended." He let the words sink in for a moment before continuing. "She is under my protection now, under the protection of the crown, and if anyone attempts to harm her, to control her, to take her against her will, they will answer to me, personally." Silence, absolute, suffocating. Then my father found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Your Majesty, I didn't know. If I had known." "You would have sold her to me instead?" Kai's voice was sharp as a blade. "Bargained her off to a higher bidder?" My father's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Kai's gaze shifted to Bartholomew, who looked like he might faint. "Your contract is terminated. Any claim you believed you had on this woman is forfeit. If you so much as speak her name again, I will consider it an act of aggression against the crown." Bartholomew nodded frantically, unable to form words. And then Kai looked at Thomas. Through the bond, I felt his fury cold and controlled and absolutely lethal. "You," Kai said quietly, "stand up." Thomas pushed himself off the wall on shaking legs, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "You tried to rob her," Kai continued, his voice soft but merciless. "Manipulated her. Planned to abandon her after taking everything she had." Thomas opened his mouth probably to deny it, to lie, to spin some story that would save his skin. "Don't," Kai warned. "I can smell deception, and I'm not in a forgiving mood." Thomas's mouth snapped shut. "You're banished," Kai said, "from this territory, from these lands. If you're found within 100 miles of my mate ever again, your life is forfeit. Do you understand?" "Yes," Thomas whispered. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Get out." Thomas fled. Kai turned back to my father, and there was something almost pitying in his expression now. "You raised a daughter with courage, intelligence, and strength," he said, "and you squandered her, tried to sell her like chattel. That failure is yours to carry." My father said nothing, just knelt there, staring at the floor. Kai looked down at me, and through the bond I felt his question before he voiced it. "Do you have anything you want to say to them?" I looked at my father, at the man who'd never once asked me what I wanted, who'd treated me like an investment instead of a person. I thought about all the things I could say, all the anger I could unleash, all the hurt I could finally voice. But in the end, only one thing mattered. "I'm done being your pawn," I said quietly. And I meant it. Kai's hand tightened on mine, and I felt his pride in me wash through the bond like sunlight. "We're leaving," he announced to the room. "Sarah will collect whatever personal belongings she wishes to take. No one will interfere, no one will follow. Is that understood?" A chorus of, "Yes, Your Majesty," filled the room. And just like that, I was free. We didn't leave immediately. Kai had one more thing to handle first. "There's someone else who needs to answer for what they've done," he said, his voice carrying through the still kneeling room. His eyes found Councilman Greaves, who'd been trying to make himself invisible in the corner. The man who'd pretended to care, who'd betrayed me just as thoroughly as Thomas had, if more quietly. "Greaves," Kai said. "Step forward." The councilman rose on trembling legs, his face ashen. "Your Majesty, You knew about the marriage contract," Kai interrupted. "You knew Sarah was being sold to Bartholomew against her will, and you did nothing." Greaves's mouth worked soundlessly. "Worse," Kai continued, and I felt his disgust ripple through the bond. "You encouraged it, reassured her father it was the right move, told him she'd be compliant." I remembered those words, heard them again in my mind, spoken in Greaves's familiar voice through my father's study door. She had potential, shame, really. "I want him tried," I said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at me. Kai's expression was unreadable. "Tried?" "Publicly." My voice was steadier than I expected. "I want everyone to know what he did, what they all did." Through the bond, I felt Kai's approval. Dark and fierce and absolutely certain. "Then publicly he'll be tried," Kai said. He gestured to his guards. "Summon the court. Everyone. I want witnesses." Within an hour, the great hall was packed. Word had spread impossibly fast, the way news always does when it involves royalty and scandal. Nobles, servants, merchants, guards, anyone who could fit into the space, crowded in to see what would happen. I stood beside Kai at the head of the hall, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing behind anyone, wasn't being presented or displayed or offered up for inspection. I was standing as an equal, as a queen. The bond hummed with Kai's steady presence, anchoring me when the weight of all those eyes threatened to overwhelm. Thomas was dragged in first, flanked by guards. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. His earlier charm completely stripped away to reveal the coward underneath. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Thomas Carver," Kai's voice rang out across the hall. "You stand accused of fraud, manipulation, and conspiracy to commit theft against Queen Sarah. How do you answer?" Thomas's throat worked. I didn't know she was... The question was, how do you answer? Kai cut him off. "Guilty or not guilty?" Silence stretched out, taut and terrible. "Guilty," Thomas finally whispered. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Explain yourself," Kai commanded. "Tell them what you did." And Thomas did. Haltingly at first, then faster, as the words spilled out of him like poison. How he'd targeted me deliberately. How he'd researched my situation, learned about my engagement to Bartholomew, recognized an opportunity. How he'd planned every conversation, every touch, every whispered promise to make me fall for him. How he'd never felt anything for me at all. "I just needed the gold," he said, and he had the audacity to sound defensive. "She had so much, and I had debts. You thought you could use her," I said quietly. The hall went silent. Thomas finally looked at me, and I saw fear in his eyes. "Good. You saw a desperate girl," I continued, my voice carrying across the space, "and you decided to exploit her, to make her believe she was loved so you could rob her blind and leave her with nothing." "I'm sorry," he said, but it sounded hollow. "I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did." I took a step forward, and I felt Kai's pride in me surge through the bond. "You meant every bit of it. You planned it, executed it. Laughed about it with your friends while I was still looking for you, still believing you cared. Thomas flinched like I'd struck him. But I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had burned through me in that alley outside the tavern had cooled into something else. Something clearer. Pity. You're pathetic, I said, and I meant it. You had a chance to be someone decent, someone real, and you chose this instead. Chose to be the kind of man who preys on vulnerable women for pocket change. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but a distant, detached sadness for how small his world must be. I don't hate you, I said softly. I pity you. And somehow that was worse than any rage I could have unleashed. Thomas crumpled, his face contorting, and I turned away. I'd said everything I needed to say. The sentence, Kai said, his voice formal now, is banishment. Thomas Carver, you are hereby exiled from the Northern Territories. All lands under Crown jurisdiction are forbidden to you. Your name will be published in every major city as a warning to others. You will carry the mark of your crime for the rest of your life. He gestured, and one of the guards stepped forward with a brand. Thomas's eyes went wide with horror. No, please. The mark, Kai continued, ignoring his pleading, will be placed on your right hand, visible to all, so that anyone who looks at you will know what kind of man you are. They held Thomas down as he screamed. The brand, a simple T for traitor and thief, was pressed into his palm. The smell of burning flesh filled the hall. I didn't look away. When it was done, Thomas was dragged out, sobbing and broken. Greaves was brought forward next. He tried to maintain his dignity, but his hands shook as the charges were read. Conspiracy, complicity, betrayal of trust. You were her friend, Kai said, and there was something cold and cutting in his voice. Or she believed you were. She trusted you, and you used that trust to help her father trap her. I was trying to protect her, Greaves protested. The marriage to Bartholomew would have secured her future. Secured her future? I laughed. And it came out sharp and bitter. You mean, secured my father's debts, secured his political alliances. I was never part of the equation except as the commodity being traded. Greaves opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. You knew I didn't want this, I said. You knew, and you helped anyway. You could have warned me, could have helped me escape, could have done 1,000 different things, but you chose to protect my father's interests instead of me. I paused, letting the words sink in. So don't stand there and pretend you were acting in my best interest. You were acting in your own. Greaves's face flushed with shame and anger, but he said nothing. The sentence, Kai pronounced, is removal from office and seizure of assets gained through your position. You will be stripped of your title, your lands, and your authority. You will leave this territory and never return. Greaves's face went white. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built gone. Additionally, I added, and Kai glanced at me with raised eyebrows, I want it known publicly why he was removed. I want the records to show exactly what he did, so that no other girl ever trusts him the way I did. Through the bond, I felt Kai's fierce satisfaction. So ordered, he said. As Greaves was led away, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been tight and knotted for so long finally loosening. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about truth. About making sure that what had been done to me in the shadows was dragged into the light. About ensuring that the men who'd treated me like property faced consequences for their actions. About reclaiming my voice. The crowd was silent as we left the hall. But I could feel their eyes on me, not with pity or judgment, but with something that looked almost like respect. For the first time in my life, I'd spoken my truth. And the world had listened. After the trial, Kai led me to a private chamber off the main hall. My father was already there, sitting in a chair that seemed too large for him now. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, smaller. The rage and authority that had defined him my entire life had drained away, leaving behind something hollow. He stood when we entered, his eyes fixed on the floor. Sit, Kai said, and it wasn't a suggestion. My father sat. I remained standing. It felt important somehow, to be the one looking down for once. You understand what's happening here, Kai said. It wasn't a question. My father nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Majesty. Then sign. One of Kai's advisors stepped forward with a document. I caught a glimpse of official seals, legal language, the weight of formal dissolution. My father's hand trembled as he took the quill. This document, the advisor explained, though I suspected it was more for my benefit than my father's, formally renounces all paternal rights, claims, and authority over Lady Sarah. It dissolves any legal obligation she has to you or your household. It acknowledges her as an independent entity, bound only to the crown through her marriage to His Majesty. My father stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he signed. The scratch of the quill against parchment felt louder than it should have. Final. Absolute. When he was done, he set the quill down carefully, and finally looked at me. I failed you, he said quietly. I waited. I told myself I was securing your future, he continued, his voice rough, that I was doing what was best, that you'd understand eventually, that you'd thank me for making the hard choices. He swallowed hard. But the truth is, I never asked what you wanted, never considered that you might have dreams of your own. I saw you as a tool, an asset, something to be used rather than someone to be loved. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I'm sorry, he said, and for the first time in my life he sounded like he meant it. For all of it. For not protecting you. For not seeing you. For failing to be the father you deserved. The words hung in the air between us. I could feel Kai's presence through the bond, steady, supportive, giving me space to handle this however I needed to. Part of me wanted to rage, to scream, to tell my father exactly how much damage he'd done, how many nights I'd cried, how many times I'd felt worthless and invisible and alone. But another part of me was just tired. Tired of carrying his failures, tired of letting his choices define me. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. Maybe someday, maybe never. But I can do something more important. My father looked up, confusion and hope warring in his expression. I can free myself from needing your approval, I continued, from waiting for you to see me, from carrying the weight of your expectations. I took a breath, feeling the truth of the words settle into my bones. You don't get to define my worth anymore. You don't get to decide who I am or what I'm capable of. That power? I'm taking it back. Something shifted in my chest, lightened, like a chain I'd been dragging had suddenly snapped. I release you from the role you never filled, I said quietly, and I release myself from needing you to fill it. My father's face crumpled, but he nodded. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I added, not looking back. I hope you learn to see people as more than pawns, before you run out of people willing to be in your life. Kai's hand found mine as we left the room, and through the bond I felt his profound respect, his understanding that what I'd just done was harder and more important than any punishment could have been. We walked in silence through the corridors until we reached the gardens. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. That was brave, Kai said softly. I shook my head. It was necessary. Both things can be true. We sat on a stone bench beneath an ancient oak, and for a moment we just existed together in the quiet. The bond hummed between us, comfortable, companionable, right. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Anything. When did you know? I looked up at him, at those impossible golden eyes. About the bond, about me being your mate. Kai was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. The moment you crashed into me in that alley, he admitted. The bond recognized you instantly. Everything in me screamed, mate, the second I touched you. My breath caught. Then why didn't you tell me? Why go through with the marriage ceremony at all if you already knew? Because you needed to choose, he said simply. You'd spent your entire life having choices stolen from you, having men decide your fate without your input. I wasn't going to be another person who took your agency away. He cupped my face gently, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. The bond would have formed eventually, he continued, but I wanted you to come to it freely, to choose me because you wanted to, not because fate or magic or desperation forced you into it. Tears spilled over now, but they weren't sad. They were something else entirely. You waited, I whispered. You could have claimed me immediately, could have used the bond to make me feel what you felt. But you waited for me to be ready. I'd have waited forever if that's what you needed, he said, and through the bond I felt the absolute truth of it. This man, this king, had given me something no one else ever had. Choice. Real, genuine, uncoerced choice. I love you, I said, and the words felt both enormous and simple. Kai's eyes widened slightly, then softened into something so tender it made my chest ache. I love you too, he murmured, my fierce, brave, impossible mate. He kissed me then, and it was nothing like the first kiss in the temple. That had been claiming, binding, magical. This was just us. His lips moved against mine with a gentleness that somehow contained all the passion and promise in the world. I felt it through the bond, his love, his devotion, his absolute commitment to protecting not just my body but my heart, my choices, my soul. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless and smiling. So, I said, a laugh bubbling up in my chest. Turns out I accidentally married destiny. Kai's answering laugh was warm and rich. Is that what we're calling it? Well, what would you call it? He pretended to consider. Cosmic intervention? Divine comedy? Exceptionally good timing? I offered you gold to marry me in an alley, I pointed out. And you turned out to be a king. That's not good timing. That's the universe having a sense of humor. The universe, Kai said, pulling me closer, has excellent taste. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop smiling. Through the bond, I felt his joy matching mine, amplifying it, creating something bigger than either of us alone. What happens now? I asked, suddenly aware that the adrenaline was fading, that the trials and confrontations were over, that real life was waiting just beyond this perfect moment. Now, Kai said, we go home, to the palace. You meet the pack. You learn what it means to be queen. He paused, his expression growing serious. And you decide what kind of queen you want to be, what causes matter to you, what changes you want to make. Because this isn't just my kingdom anymore, Sarah. It's ours. Ours. The word settled into me like a benediction. Not his, not as his possession or his ornament or his political tool. Ours, as partners, as equals. I have some ideas, I admitted. I'm sure you do. Kai's smile was knowing, and I can't wait to hear every single one of them. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the garden in golden light. A new day, a new beginning. I leaned my head against Kai's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of the bond connecting us. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. Because for the first time, the future was mine to choose. The carriage was waiting at the gates. Not the gilded, ostentatious type my father would have chosen, something meant to display wealth and status. This was simpler, elegant, built for comfort and speed, bearing Kai's crest on the door, that silver wolf against the dark moon. I stood at the entrance to my father's estate one last time, looking back at the place that had been my prison for so long. The stone walls that had contained me, the windows I'd stared out of, dreaming of escape, the gardens where I'd cried behind rose bushes, believing no one cared enough to see. I waited for the expected surge of emotion, bitterness, anger, even nostalgia for the few good memories buried beneath all the bad ones. But I felt nothing except a quiet, settled certainty. This place didn't own me anymore. Ready? Kai asked softly, his hand warm in mine. I turned away from the estate without looking back again. Yes, I said. I'm ready. We climbed into the carriage together, and as the wheels began to turn, carrying us away from everything I'd known, I felt the last threads of my old life fall away. No regrets. No fear. Just the open road ahead and the man beside me, our bond humming with shared contentment. Through the window, I watched the countryside roll past, fields awakening in the early morning light, villages beginning their day. A world that had always existed beyond my father's walls, waiting for me to step into it. What are you thinking? Kai asked. I considered the question. Really considered it. I spent so long running, I said finally. Running from my father's plans, running from Bartholomew, running from a future I didn't choose. Even when I met you, I was still running, desperate and terrified and convinced that escape was the only answer. I laced my fingers through his, feeling the solid reality of his presence. But I'm not running anymore. Kai's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, encouraging me to continue. I'm walking into my life now, I said, and the words felt like truth settling into my bones. Walking into a future I'm choosing, with someone who sees me as more than a pawn or a prize or a problem to be solved. I really looked at him, this king who'd given me everything by asking for nothing. I'm walking into being your mate, I continued. Your queen, your partner. But more than that, I'm walking into being myself, fully, without apology, without permission. Through the bond, I felt his pride in me, his love, his absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. You're going to be extraordinary, he said quietly. You already are. We'll be extraordinary together, I corrected. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Yes, together. The carriage rolled on, carrying us north toward the palace, toward the pack that would become my family, toward responsibilities I was ready to shoulder and challenges I was ready to face, toward a life that was finally, completely, mine. I thought about the girl I'd been just days ago, the one who'd believed she had no power, no choices, no way out. The one who'd been so desperate she'd offered gold to a stranger in an alley and begged him to save her. She seemed so far away now, like someone I'd known in another lifetime. But she'd been brave too, in her own way, brave enough to run, when running seemed impossible, brave enough to ask for help even when she had no reason to believe help would come, brave enough to choose the bond when she could have walked away. I carried her with me still, not as something to be ashamed of, but as proof of how far I'd come. From pawn to queen, from property to partner, from running to walking, from survival to living. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the fog, and I felt something shift inside me one final time. Not the bond that was steady and constant now, as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. This was something else, something that had been locked away for so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate, fragile kind that shatters at the first sign of trouble, but the deep, resilient kind that grows stronger with each breath. The kind that says, yes, life will be hard, but I can handle it. Yes, there will be challenges, but I won't face them alone. Yes, I am enough exactly as I am. I leaned my head against Kai's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around me, holding me close. Thank you, I whispered. For what? For waiting. For choosing me back. For giving me the space to find myself. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. You would have found yourself regardless. I just had the privilege of being there when you did. Through the bond, I felt the truth of it. He really believed that. Believed in me with a certainty I was only beginning to believe in myself. But I was learning. Every mile we traveled, every moment that passed, I was learning what it meant to be free, what it meant to be loved, what it meant to step into my own power instead of borrowing someone else's. The girl who'd run through fog-shrouded streets in terror was gone. In her place was a woman who'd chosen her fate, who'd looked destiny in the eye and said yes, who'd taken everything that was meant to break her and used it to forge herself into something stronger. A queen, a mate, a survivor who'd become a warrior without ever picking up a sword. The palace appeared on the horizon as the sun reached its peak, all silver stone and soaring towers, beautiful and imposing and utterly unlike my father's cold estate. Home. Our home. I sat up straighter, squaring my shoulders, ready to meet whatever came next. Because I'd stopped running from my life, and I'd started walking into it. One choice at a time, one step at a time, one breath at a time, free. Thank you for listening to another emotional, magical shifter romance here on Tina Romance Library. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss more powerful, heart-gripping romance stories.